just using my brush lightly with just a little of the color. Alright, hello and welcome to this tutorial. To start, we have a 16 by 20 primed canvas. Primed, I mean I've got a coat of titanium white on this that has fully dried. You can use a gesso, you can use a titanium white, whatever you like. Now I'm mixing up some white, black, and I've got a little cerulean blue. You can choose any color that you like. I'm going to add a little water. And I have a little water on my flat brush. I'm going to take my flat brush and go over my canvas just to get a little water on the surface before I start. This is just a very light coat of water. Now mixing up my ground. What I'm going to do is create a ground color, which is my background for this painting. And I want it to have just a little bit of a light gray tone with just the tiniest bit of a blue undertone. So that's what I have by mixing up those three. I'm going to actually mix some more here. I've got white. That's just a titanium white. And I'm going to put just a little bit of a basic black, just a drop. With black, a little goes a very long way. So I'm literally just going to drop a little onto my palette, that much. If you want a deeper tone in your background, then you can, of course, add more. And then my cerulean blue. I'm just putting a little bit. So black, mostly white, and a little cerulean blue. You can use any blue you have on hand. It'll just change the tone of it a bit. I want sort of a cool tone versus any green in it. Cerulean doesn't have that. And I'm mixing that up with my brush. You can mix it with a palette knife or whatever you have on hand. I just want to get a good basic background color. Alright, so I still have a little bit of white, or not white, but water on my canvas. So I'm just going to put that down in a nice even coat. I'm getting a little bit of variation of color because I used my brush to mix my paint, which is fine because I'm going to smooth it out anyway. If you wanted to have a perfect gray or a perfect whatever color it is you're mixing without any variation of color, always use another tool besides your, just put a mist of water on my canvas, besides your brush that you're using. Use something else to mix. That's one thing. If you use the brush that you're going to paint with, your brush will capture various bits of color within the hairs. So a little blue here, a little black there, and that will come out in the surface of your painting. If you don't mind that, you can use your brush to mix your paint. I often do that because I like that variation of color. But if you don't want that, use a spoon or a palette knife or something, mix it, and then introduce your brush. So I just want to get a nice coat of this down because this is our background base layer. And then we will be coming over it with our other colors after it dries. And I am going to let this dry for 24 hours before I introduce my next layer of color, which is very important to let your painting dry thoroughly, or you will be sorry when you try to cheat the system and put paint on top of paint that hasn't dried fully, what happens is, since acrylics are water-based, and you will often use a little water when you're introducing them to your canvas, if you apply anything with water over paint that hasn't fully dried, the water will eat through the paint and you will end up with a patchy surface, which is what I'm getting right now for some reason, in certain areas. And you never want to spray a painting with your mister bottle that hasn't fully dried. And by fully dried, I mean days of drying, like a week. You know it's dry, and then you can comfortably mist over paint that's been laid down. Even then, I really wouldn't suggest it. I would always suggest adding water to your palette or your brush versus putting down a mist of paint over, a mist of water over your paint. Even if you know it's dry, it's a risky move. I've had that happen. It will eat little bits of paint. And if you've watched any of my tutorials, you know that I do sort of preach that, because it will happen. All right, so what I have here is a good ground. It has a little bit of patchiness, but that's okay, because I'm going to come over it with a glaze layer that's going to give it a lot of richness. But this is just giving me my background color. So this is a light gray. I mixed up with the white, the black, the cerulean blue, a little water, applied it with my flat brush, and I am going to let this dry for a full 24 hours, and then we will come back and build upon it. Okay, we are back. This has fully dried, this light coat of gray that we put on. And in my palette right now, what I'm mixing up is some Payne's Gray and a little of my phthalo blue green. New bottles, totally clean. Love that. I also have my phthalo blue green, my Payne's Gray, some satin glaze. And that's my liquid glazing medium there. And I'm going to mix that with a little water. I want this to be a very light coat. So I'm just going to mix this up. I want this to be a really pretty intense blue, but I do want it to be a glaze layer. So that's mixed up. I'm going to take a flat brush with a little water on it and apply that water to my canvas, just a little bit. Actually, I'm going to be working in the section here on the bottom more. So it's just a little bit of water on my canvas. Then picking up some of that paint with my flat brush and applying my pretty layer of glue. More water in my paint. I want to get it nice and fluid. And I'm just using alternating strokes here. I'm not really worried about how perfect it is. I do not mind if some of the gray shows through underneath. It's kind of my intention. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to soften this with just a little water for this top section. Kind of carry some of that color up, but I'm just really using what's on my brush right now. Don't worry about adding more because we're going to be going over that. Okay, I'm smoothing this out a little bit. I'm going to go around my edges. Just to make sure I have those covered. I do want those covered. Okay, so as you can tell, I have not laid down a perfectly uniform coat of paint. I've got a little of that gray showing through underneath. And I'm going to just sort of hold my canvas a bit, smudge that out a little, just to kind of give you the idea of what I'm going for here. This is kind of a distressed look that we're after on the bottom area. You don't have to do this. You can leave the full-on paint if you prefer that, but this is what I've chosen for this painting. So it's just a dry, little bit of a damp paper towel, not very much water on it at all. Right after our paint sets just a bit, kind of wipe some of that off just lightly, just so I have the basic color down. And again, I've got some patchy areas, and that's perfectly fine. If that happens somewhere else on your painting or doesn't happen at all, you can just rub away a little more paint. Or you can leave it, like I said, 100% uniform in color. The reason I did that with such a light coat of the paint with the glaze is to get this sort of distressed, sort of just watermarked look on the bottom of this painting. So I'm going to let this dry very thoroughly, and then we're going to come in and add our additional colors. Okay, so we have fully and completely dried the last layer. So what I'm going to do now is take some water, apply it to my canvas, mostly in this top part. I want it fairly wet for this section. We are going to do some layers of paint, and we're going to do them all at once. So I want this to have a fair amount of water on it. This is good and dry. Now I'm going to be working with my Payne's Gray, my phthalo, and I'm also going to be working with pouring medium. And I'm going to be using this a little differently maybe than what you've seen, maybe not. And I'm also going to be using some titanium white. So I'm going to put a little water on my flat brush, and I'm going to put some of the pouring medium in my palette. And I'm going to apply this actually with my large flat brush that's already wet. I'm going to grab a little of that, and I'm going to apply that to the entire top and middle of my painting. That's where we're really going to be concentrating this. I'm going to get a little more water. We do want this fairly wet, not soaking, but not just a tiny bit. I'm applying water onto my brush like this and then laying it down. But you can apply however you like. All right, so we've got that wet, we've got pouring medium on there. Now what I'm going to do is take some titanium white, and I'm just going to put that on directly on my canvas. You can put it in a palette if you like, but I'm going to work with it like this. And we're just going to bring it onto my canvas with short, choppy brush strokes. A little bit more. I want a fairly good layer of this particular paint over that pouring medium and water. I want to bring it down, and I'm bringing it sort of just in these short brush strokes. You can use a little variance if you like that, but for this look, I just kind of want to lay it down like that. All right, so next thing, once I've got all of that fairly well covered, and you don't have to make it a super white. You want some of the blue underneath to show through. That's what gives it a lot of dimension in your artwork. All right, so for this, now that we've brought it down into that sort of center line here, I'm going to take some more of my pouring medium, and I put that in my palette. I'm going to add some water, a significant amount, and with a clean brush, mix that up. And I'm going to go ahead and put that kind of, flicking around, right in there. And you can actually pour that as it suggests. So that's fairly nice and wet in that layer. And add some right down here. We're going to bring it down into this area here. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is put my paint on that section. Working first with my Payne's Gray. I actually want a little more than that. Bringing that right in there. In a very kind of just back and forth motion. You can apply more depth in certain areas. Kind of like what's going on in a couple of these. Be careful, this will splatter. I'm getting some splatters here that I'm gonna have to work on. And since it's so wet. Alright, so we've got a mix of the white and the blue right in here. Come back with my white brush real quick and just clean up a couple of those little splatters. You could leave them. This is called sea spray after all, and that has splatters. Now what I'm going to do is come in with some of my phthalo, just drop that a couple spots, just for some brightness in that blue, which gives it a very, I think, interesting look. And I'll bring a little more right here because this is going to be our focal point. And working with that pouring medium on there in the water is going to give you a little different look. It's going to be very fluid and flowy, but you're also going to be able to create some strokes. So bringing that white that we had from underneath, working into the center section here just a little, tie it all together. And then just working with small brush strokes, bringing this down in here. We are going to get splatter if we get too crazy with our brush, so work small if you don't want splatter because it is very wet. Now working with a mop brush and bringing a dry fanned out mop brush into this, you can take this and create some expressive looks like this with your brush and all of the medium that is on there. So it does, you know, sort of resemble a sea spray. Now remember, once your brush gets fairly wet, it's just going to kind of deposit paint, and it's not really going to do what you want it to do. So you've got to work kind of quickly, move that all around. You might have to grab another one, so it's always good to have a couple dry mops if you're working with mops. And, you know, finesse certain areas, because once a mop gets wet, it kind of stops doing what you want it to do, oddly. I think I'm going to just work on this a little to soften it. And since you've got that medium on there and you've got all the paint, you're able to kind of work that through nicely because it's very fluid. And then I'm going to put just a little, take my white brush, just what I had on there before, and deposit a little bit of that color down just to lighten right here in the very couple of sections that I just want a little more white dropped in. Alright, so that's a fairly quick painting to do technique. I like pretty much what I've got here, and by layering all of those with that pouring medium and the water, you're able to create this. Now I can't really tilt this for too long because all that wetness is going to drip, so you need to leave this just where you finish it or put it in a nice flat drying spot, and it really does need to dry for at least 24-48 hours to really cure, because you've got a fair amount of that medium and paint on there. And then when we're have it nice and dry, I'm going to come back and finish it. Okay, this has completely dried, our flow pattern that we put on here. So I have a couple of small sections that had a little bit of a pool of paint and left like just a little spot of I don't know, it's like a little water ring almost right in there. And that does happen sometimes when you're dealing with a lot of medium. So what I'm going to do to kind of fill that in and give a little highlight to my painting is mix up, and this is just the palette I used. It's going to be recycled. I'm going to work on the back because I'm not going to do a flowy type material. I'm taking some thick gloss glaze, or not glaze, gloss medium, sorry, right there. And it's kind of a thick, creamy material. I'm going to mix in a little of my Brilliant Phthalo Blue Green, and I'm going to mix in something called an illuminator, or an illuminating medium. I'm going to put that on there, and what that does is add sort of a glow, kind of a glowy effect to the paint. I know you've seen paintings with it. It just depends. It kind of just really adds a little different light to the color. And I don't mean light as in white. I mean an actual light, sort of like it's illuminated. I'm mixing that up. I just want a little bit, so that's why I'm using kind of this small little back of my palette. I like to recycle whenever I can and use my materials, my palettes, whatever, as many times as I possibly can. That's giving us kind of just a primary blue there, but it's going to dry really pretty. Then I'm taking sort of a fine pointed brush here, And you can do this with a small palette knife as well. A very fine pointed palette knife would be perfect for this. Picking up a good quantity of that paint, and I'm going to drop it right in there to give it sort of an impasto effect of light. Now you could use a different color. You could use a white here if you'd rather have a white type of impasto or highlight. I'm going to put it down in this section, and I'm just doing a little drop of color to add a little visual interest to this surface of this painting. So I've got 3, and I should probably add one right here just to kind of balance it out. And again, it's not a lot. You don't want to overdo this because then it kind of ruins the effect. But if you do it judiciously, then you're fine. I'm going to take just a little of the thin paint without a lot of the impasto effect. Just kind of go over a couple little spots that I feel maybe could use just a little more color. And this is something that often you may or may not need to do on your own painting, depending. If you like how it flowed and how it worked out for you, don't mess with it. Just skip this. You know, if you don't have any little spots of where the paint has crazed or pooled, you can skip this, or you can just go ahead and add it over those little spots on your painting wherever you see that it might need a little highlight. And that just adds a little extra interest to your painting, where it will take something that, you know, maybe wasn't that exciting or kind of turned out a little muddy, and this will add just a little highlight of color in a couple of spots. So I'm just using my brush lightly with just a little of the color just to add that, and when you see the final painting, you'll see those added. And I'm just being very light with that. And that's just going to add a little glow, a little color, a little of that pretty blue-green. So I'm going to let that dry very well. And usually a thick impasto, well, an acrylic will dry, you know, you can get away with 24 hours. I like 48, just to be sure it's extra dry, depending on the climate you live in. A humid climate might take a little longer. I'm in the desert, so I tend to dry quickly. I'm going to let that dry really, really well, and then we're going to come back and finish off our painting. All right, in this session, this has fully dried. Our little highlights have dried really beautifully, like little bits of blue glass on our painting. Everything is dried thoroughly, and I'm going to put a nice glossy glaze on this. I want a gloss finish to go along with some of our other look. When you use the pouring medium, it's going to give you a little bit of a glossy finish. So that's what I've got in here and in here, and not so much down here because we didn't use that pouring medium in the bottom. So I'm going to put the gloss over the entire thing to tie it all together. So again, that's an acrylic glazing liquid and gloss. And I'm just going to put some of that into my palette. I'm going to add a little bit of water, not a ton, and I'm working with a wet flat brush. This has some water on it. I'm just going to go over my entire painting with a little bit of water, just so my glaze has a little movement. Add a little more to my palette. All right, and then mixing the water and the glaze. I'm going to start at the bottom. That's where I want the most concentration. Working back and forth. for the first coat, and then I'm going to go up and down just to make sure I get everything, every little nook and cranny on my canvas. And if you are working large, this is a sort of a medium-sized canvas, so it's easy to do in a stroke, but sometimes I work very large canvases, and when you're doing that, what I would suggest to do is work sections. So you might do your entire glaze of your top, going both this way and this way, then you do the middle, and then your bottom, and then tie it together, and then after that dries, you often go over the entire thing again. But this should be a good coat for this painting. It looks like I've covered it, I can see in the light. Going around the edges, always go around your edges especially, because even though you think you've hit them with your brush, you often will miss them. Your brush will flick up at the sides and not catch. I do state that quite a bit in my tutorials. Okay, so we are done, and the reason that I have put my glaze coat on first, I have not finished my sides yet, we're going to do that in the next session, is I want this to be nice and dry, then I'll finish off my edge, my sides of my canvas last, and then we will be done. Okay, this has dried well enough that I can go ahead and finish the sides. It's not fully cured, so I'm going to be careful of the surface, but it has dried for about an hour or so. So I see that I have some drips here on the sides, so the best way for me to cover that is with either a black or a titanium white. I'm going to use some titanium white. I have it on my flat brush here. And just a tiny bit of water on my brush, not much, because you really don't want a lot of dripping with your sides. You want to pretty much use the paint full strength, especially to cover dark spots like this. So what I do is I will put that on first and kind of let that dry. Anywhere where there's the darkest spots that I need to cover, and go around my canvas like that. Very careful not to move large sweeping motions like that, or jerky motions, because this will splatter onto the surface of my canvas. So I'm working in a straight sort of up and down, if you can tell, and working fairly slowly so I don't get a lot of splatter and movement. And then you can smooth your paint. Anything that goes over it, use a little piece of a barely damp paper towel like this, and then you can just wipe away any little bits of paint and leave yourself with a very nice crisp edge that's finished. So I'm going to go ahead and just go around, do this entire canvas, and that will be it. I do want to thank you so much for joining me on this tutorial. I hope you've learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. And, you know, let me know what you think. And please check out my other tutorials for acrylic painting and techniques. Thanks again.